Hey guys, today I'm going to take you through how I keg my beer, transferring from my carboy to my Commercial Sanke Keg. Now, I'm actually going to be conditioning this beer in the keg and artificially carbonating it with CO2. Since I'm not carbing with priming sugar, I don't want to expose the beer to any oxygen. This method that I'm using is a closed system transfer, meaning I'm using CO2 to push my beer from the fermenting vessel into the keg. So this is the setup. You can see I have my CO2 on the right, a racking arm that will draw the beer from the bottom of the carboy and into the keg. So let's go through this process. So here I am hooking up my CO2 to my keg. I've already cleaned the keg thoroughly, and now there is star sand in it. So I need to purge the star sand by turning on the CO2 to a low pressure is fine, tapping the keg, and then flushing out all of the star sand. This tends to blow all of the star sand out all over the place if you're not careful, so make sure you have a bucket ready. And then it's also a good idea to flush your keg. From what I've read, about 30 seconds of flushing your keg will remove all of the oxygen. So I flush for 30 seconds with CO2. When all of the star sand and oxygen has been purged, I don't want to pressurize the keg because I'm going to be filling it with beer. So actually, I just untap the keg and turn off my CO2 at this point. Okay, so now I'm going to remove my CO2 from the keg. I'm also going to remove the CO2 inlet. That way, as the beer enters the keg, it will push out the CO2 in the headspace. If you don't do this, you'll have pressure build up and it won't transfer. So then I'm going to cover that with some sanitized saran wrap. So then you tap your keg with your clean and sanitized coupler, and be sure to remove all of the internal parts of your coupler so that it's a straight shot into the keg. Next, you want to clean and sanitize your dip tube and place that into your fermenter cap. I've attached a little piece of silicone tubing so that I can control the height of the racking arm. Next, I'm going to sanitize, and I just flush the tube a little bit with CO2 so it gets all the oxygen out. And we're going to attach that to the fermenter cap, small side. Now it's really important when you're doing all of this that you use very low pressure on your CO2 and wear safety glasses and be very careful because this is actually really dangerous. See, I've how loosely my dip tube fits onto my carboy cap. The way I deal with safety with this is to have very loose fitting so that if ever there's a spike in pressure, I can always just release my own pressure and I can test how much CO2 is flowing into the carboy. There's a potential with this, and proceed with caution because your carboy made of glass could actually explode if there's too much pressure. So make sure you wear safety glasses if you're going to attempt this, and use very low pressure. On BYO they say 3 or 4 psi. I actually just do about 2 psi to get the pressure going for the siphoning, and then I just keep it flowing very loosely as I'm making the transfer. And I'm going to add just enough pressure with the CO2 to push down from the top onto the beer and force it up through the dip tube and eventually down into the keg, creating a siphoning effect. And then you can see the beer slowly coming up, and then as it falls down, it will eventually start creating a siphon. When I get towards the bottom of the carboy, I tip it on its side slightly to get the remaining beer without getting any of the sediment that's settled towards the bottom. The final step is to pressurize your keg and flush out any headspace a couple times to make sure there's no oxygen remaining in the keg. I do that by attaching the CO2 line to the CO2 inlet, then make sure your beer outlet is covered or closed off so that beer doesn't shoot out the top. Then go ahead and pressurize to 10 to 15 psi, flushing out a couple times, relieving the pressure on the coupler to make sure any remaining oxygen is out of the keg. Then you're ready to go. So there you have it. It's pretty easy to transfer beer this way using Commercial Sanke Kegs. It's a little dangerous to use a glass carboy, but as long as you're careful and you don't use too much CO2 pressure, I think this is a very effective way of transferring your beer without exposure to oxygen. I hope this video helps someone out there that's thinking about using commercial kegs or kegging in general rather than bottling their own homebrew. This method's pretty easy, and we'll check in a later video just how effective it is in keeping that dreaded oxygen out of your beer. Alright, we'll see you guys later.